Welcome all. Thank you for joining us today to pay our respects to those that have fought and died for the freedom that we enjoy daily. John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. As a small child, I listened to my grandparents and parents talk about times of war that they had experienced. Fear, worry, being without, losing family members and friends. I was young and had always been safe. I did not truly understand, but I could certainly see the sadness in their eyes. As I grew, we studied wars and conflicts in school, facts, numbers, dates, times, interesting stories. I did not truly understand. As a teenager, I watched as friends were drafted to leave and fight in Vietnam, a country I knew very little about. Many that were called didn't know much about it either, but they went. Many didn't come home. This war in my lifetime was surreal, and even still, I didn't understand. I freely drove a car here today. I freely wrote words that I chose for these comments today in the comfort of my home last night. I talked to my children openly, my friends. I worship in my church to my God freely. Freely. Freedom isn't free. Franklin D. Roosevelt said, those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them. Today, here with you to remember those that gave their lives so that I could be safe and free, even when they did not agree with the war they fought in at times, and some did not come home. Today, I understand. May we always understand the gift of freedom. May we always be grateful to and honor those that died to keep us free. I hope that you will enjoy our program today. I would like to recognize some folks that we have with us, and it's very hot, so if you get to feeling woozy, find some shade, okay? Ray Felder, our state representative. We have Councilman Jamie Shirey, Councilman Lisa McCarley, Councilman Larry Huntley, Councilman Ronnie Helms. We have Mayor Charlie Powers, and Tom Adams I've seen walking around from our Planning Commission. With that, we would like to start with an opening prayer with Johnny Helms from the American Legion Post 43.
Let us bow our heads in prayer, please. Almighty God, in your hands are the living and the dead. We give you thanks for all those, our comrades, who have laid down their lives in the service of our country. May they rest in peace, and may light perpetually shine upon them. May the good work of seeking justice for the oppressed and peace for all mankind be rewarded with success, that our sacrifices shall not have been in vain. And may we never fail to remember the awesome cost of the freedom that we enjoy. All this we ask in your holy name. Amen.
Now call Mike Craven, he's the commander of American Legion Post 43.
Thank you, Honorable Madam Mayor. Once again, it's a privilege to be in front of you to honor those who cannot be here. Please rise if you can for the posting of our colors, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the National Anthem. Sergeant at Arms, post our colors. Dale Moses will now present the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to introduce Emily Mercado, a rising ninth grader at Fort Mill High School, for the national anthem.
Thank you. And thank you, Emily. It takes great courage to stand up here and do that, especially without sheet music. You did great. Thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Fahner grew up in Cambridge, Ohio. He was the son of an Army mess sergeant who couldn't cook. I love that. Colonel Fahner graduated from the Ohio State University and was commissioned as a U.S. Air Force second lieutenant in 1981. His first assignment was an intercontinental ballistic missile launch officer with the former 321st Strategic Missile Wing at Grand Forks, North Dakota. He spent the remainder of his military and civilian career as an intelligence officer with the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C. While in Washington, D.C., Colonel Fahner received a Master's of Science in Strategic Intelligence degree from the National Intelligence University in 2000 and returned as an adjunct professor for intelligence collection with a focus on measurement and signature intelligence at the same university. Colonel Fahner retired from the Air Force on Veterans Day in 2006. He remained as a civilian employee at the Defense Intelligence Agency until he retired as a senior intelligence policy officer in December 2014. He and his wife, Patricia Petty Fahner, a proud Clemson graduate, moved to Fort Mill in January 2015. Colonel Fahner volunteers at the Kershaw Correctional Institution in Kershaw, South Carolina, and is a member of the American Legion Post 43 in Fort Mill. He is a member of the Honor Guard and serves as the post bugler. Could we have a warm welcome for Lieutenant Colonel Mark Fahner?
Thank you, Mayor Savage. Well, good morning. It's a beautiful Memorial Day. Thank you all the veterans for showing up and families of veterans and local Fort Mill residents. This is an auspicious day. It's a wonderful day. We honor our fallen veterans. You know, my wife and I moved to Fort Mill about 2 years ago, living in Washington, D.C. for over 30 years. It's kind of nice to move down here where the traffic's not as bad and the congestion's a lot less. And you may think you have bad traffic, but you've not experienced until you've gone into Washington, D.C. in a rush hour in any morning. I always had an interest in local history. I always try to find out about the local communities I'm living in, some of the folks that grew up here, some of the families that were instrumental in making the community just exactly what it is. I especially love small towns and the history that goes along with those small towns. Do you realize 100 years ago this month, the United States declared war on Germany? I think it's very interesting that we stand behind, the statue behind me pays tribute to those men that fought in World War I. The United States declared war on Germany, marking their entry into the war. We would be remiss not to reflect on the monumental struggle of World War I that redefined the world and reshaped Fort Mill. World War I is often referred to the war to end all wars. It led to many technological advances, such as the use of the internal combustion engine in warfare, machine guns, poison gas, explosives with greater destructive power than ever seen before. The war led to almost 10 million killed worldwide, almost 30 million wounded or injured. And then nations came together about a year later after the United States entered the war for the treaty that would end this tragedy. But think about it, 100 years ago, this very location probably looked a lot different. I've got a book about the history of Fort Mill. You know, there was a whittling porch up about where Hobo's is. I guess the men of Fort Mill all congregated there to discuss the events of the day. There was a hotel up on the hill. Off to our left was a train station. And Fort Mill residents shopped in Fort Mill and probably socialized and discussed the events of the day. About that same time, members of the National Guard from Fort Mill were preparing to leave home for training for eventual enter into the fighting in Europe. This unit from Fort Mill would form Company G of the 118th Infantry Division. Company G served with distinction and had the acclaim of being the first unit to break through the Hindenburg Line. I'm going to highlight a couple of individuals from Fort Mill that served with distinction in World War I. One was Thomas Lee Hall. We've all driven down Tom Hall Street. Tom Hall would receive the posthumous Medal of Honor for his heroic action at Mont Ben-Heen, where he served and saved the lives of the men of his platoon. Sergeant Hall succeeded in knocking out several hostile machine gun positions that were preventing the advance of his platoon. Sergeant Hall discovered an enemy were located in a shell hole nearby and had a machine gun nest. Not willing to sacrifice his men, he advanced alone and killed the occupants of this foxhole with his bayonet. Later that day, while advancing on another machine gun post, Sergeant Hall was mortally wounded by machine gun fire. Another individual was Colonel Elliott Springs. He served his country with valor as a member of the 148th Aero Squadron. He became the 5th ranked flying ace of World War I, which is a remarkable achievement at the time. The life of a pilot in World War I was very grueling and was often very short-lived. I have a lot of photographs which my great-uncle Ross took in France, and you can see airplanes just littering the countryside. So you can tell that life of a pilot was probably not a very long-lived thing in World War I. So when Colonel Springs returned home, he took over management of the Fort Mill Manufacturing Company, which became, Fort Mill's primary mill, forever changing the community of Fort Mill and throughout York County. Another individual was my great-grandfather, who was from Ohio, Lieutenant Otis Fillmore Miller. He served as a surgeon with the U.S. Army Signal Corps at Kelly Field in San Antonio, Texas. Now, Kelly Field was one of the main sites all the flyers went to get training and learn how to fly their aircraft in combat before deploying to France as part of the American Expeditionary Force. I often wonder if my great-grandfather ever crossed paths with Colonel Springs down at Kelly Field. We'll never really know. So here we are, 100 years ago, to commemorate Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a federal holiday remembering those who have died in service to our country's armed forces. The holiday originated as Decoration Day after the American War between the states in 1868, when veterans from Decatur, Illinois, established for the first time a holiday or a commemorate to decorate the graves of the dead with war dead with flowers. It is often commemorated by visiting cemeteries and memorials particularly to honor those who have died in military service. Just last Wednesday, a member of the American Legion Post from Fort Mill, Post 43, placed flags on the graves of service members throughout the cemeteries in Fort Mill. You know, you can really learn a town's history by walking through its cemeteries. Placing flags on the grave of veterans, you get a sense of the sacrifice that Fort Mill citizens paid for this country. We place flags on the service members from families like Stearns, Potts, Spratt, Jones family, just to name a few. It's sobering to think about what these veterans saw in combat and the families who waited for them back home here in Fort Mill. One grave that particularly stood out to me was that of Staff Sergeant Thomas Woodford Bradford, who served as a gunner on a B-29 bomber assigned to the 8th Air Force stationed in Europe during World War II. You heard in my bio that I served as a missileer. We were part of the 8th Air Force. The missiles were part of the 8th Air Force now. So I feel kind of honored to have laid a flag at the grave of somebody that was a precursor of the organization that I was part of. So Staff Sergeant Bradford was killed in action when he bailed out of his airplane as it went down on 29 December 1944. I recently read a biography of B-29 bomber crews, and the amount of loss was staggering in 1944. They were tasked to fly headlong into anti-aircraft fire, dealt with assaults by German fighters, only to drop bombs on target deep within the country of Germany. The heroism dedication of these air crews was legendary. Staff Sergeant Bradford, for his actions, won 2 Purple Hearts, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal for his valor in combat. The last 2 medals are the highest honor that the U.S. Army Air Corps could ever bestow on an airman. As mentioned in my introduction, I grew up in a small town called Cambridge, Ohio. Some of you might recently heard about Cambridge, Ohio. It's where Senator John Guynn was born, the astronaut. John Guynn was my childhood hero. I always looked up to Senator Guynn, actually was an astronaut at the time. For the time he had service with the Marine Corps and what he'd done for this country, orbiting the Earth. My family was very dedicated to the military. As she mentioned, my father was a mess sergeant with the National Guard. Several of my uncles were World War II veterans. And I often talked to them about military service and what it meant to be loyal and provide service to this country through military activities. One of my uncles instilled the love of this country and fostered my interest in joining the Air Force. But what I remember most about Memorial Day was my youth. It wasn't about the car or appliance sales that you see on TV. It wasn't about the picnics in the city park. It was about the flags and the patriotism of the local folks of Cambridge, Ohio, and the Memorial Day ceremonies. Memorial Day parade was always the end of the event, and it ended up on the steps of the courthouse. We usually had a speech from a local politician, a student reciting the Gettysburg Address, and then would end with the playing of taps. My senior year of high school, I had the honor of playing taps for Memorial Day. I remember being very nervous, not that folks around here who are performing today haven't been a little nervous, but you're very nervous. We would line up on both sides of the courthouse. One player would play the lead, and then one player would play the echo. A little history about taps. Taps was a song that started in July of 1862 at Harrison's Landing in Virginia at the request of Brigadier General Daniel Butterfield to mark the end of the day. It was a way of getting the soldiers to understand that the time was over and they needed to rest for the next day's events. Over the years, taps became a vital component in honoring the military dead at funerals and memorial ceremonies. As a trumpet player in high school and college, I was often requested to play taps for military funerals. I would meet the Veterans of Foreign War, the VFW, or American Legion Post and meet up with the honor guards of those organizations. And we would head out and play taps at funerals. I always liked playing for the VFW just a little bit better because they paid us with hamburgers and Cokes. The VFW would just give it, or the American Legion would just kind of give us a handshake and send us on our way. Uh-oh. Although I remember on a few occasions At the gravesite, there was only the preacher, the member of the firing squad, and myself. This left me a long-lasting impression that no family member took the time to show up for the veteran's funeral. That kind of hit kind of hard, that these men served their country and served with distinction, and nobody really showed up to have their internment. So here I am 40 years later, serving as the American Legion bugler for Post 43, along with these honor guard here to my right. We serve with distinction. Over the past year, I have played taps at the funerals of veterans from Fort Mill. I try to learn as much about these individuals as I can, reading their obituaries and talk to people that really kind of knew them to understand what their lives were like and how they grew up and what they did for Fort Mill. Many of these veterans were teachers, business owners, and community leaders. I guess I've been playing this simple yet meaningful tune for over 40 years. For me, Memorial Day wouldn't be the same if it wasn't for a rifle salute and the playing of taps. On this Memorial Day, I urge you to take time out of your day to remember the veterans who have passed on and pray for their families and friends. We owe them a great measure of gratitude for their sacrifice for our country. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to introduce to you Nora Robinson, a rising 7th grader from Pleasant Knoll Middle School who is going to play Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know the days to sing God's praise. Then when we first begun.
Absolutely beautiful. What a beautiful thing. Laying of the wreath. The Ladies Auxiliary, American Legion Post 43, Lil Coleman.
Good morning. Placing of the wreath are 2 auxiliary junior members, Alyssa Brumfield and Sophie Miller. The 2 yellow roses on the wreath represents our 2 Gold Star mothers, Minnie Stegall, she cannot be here tonight or today, and Diane Massey. Diane, would you just please raise your hand over there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's quite beautiful and quite touching. We will now have rifle volley and taps with the honor guard from the American Legion Post 43.
It's been an honor again, as I said earlier, to be here. I'd like to announce that our American Legion Post 43 at the top of the hill is giving a free meal for veterans. Any veteran would like to go up to the post hamburger plate or a hot dog plate free of charge. Anyone else, $5 and $4. Please, if you'd like, there's a lot of volunteers up there ready to serve you. It's been a pleasure. We have, if you'd please rise for the retrieval and the 21-gun salute. Sergeant at Arms, take charge of the honor guard.
Ready? Aim. Fire. Cover. Ready? Aim. Fire. Cover. Ready? Aim. Fire. Cover. Left. Raise it.
We will now retrieve our colors. Color guard. Sergeant at Arms, retrieve our colors.
Retreat. Retreat.
I would be remiss not to thank our beautiful Strawberry Festival queens for joining us today, and to mention that it hurts my heart to stand at this event and remember James Hammonds, that was a lifelong friend of me and of my family, and to not have him here today it's a hole in my heart. The last comment I have is that I stand here on top of these bricks with names of folks that have served and provided sacrifice for us. We stand on their shoulders every single day of our life. We stand on the shoulders of those that sacrificed things that we can't understand. Thanks to each and every one of you, for the town staff, and for being a part of such a wonderful community. May you have a wonderful Memorial Day. Thank you.